Let's get started. Welcome to Advanced Flight Planning with ForeFlight Dispatch. In this webinar, we're going to walk through the basics of ForeFlight Dispatch and show you how it can help your team collaboratively plan, file, support, and monitor flights. Let's go ahead and meet our presenters for today. Caitlin and Josh, tell us about yourselves.
I'm Caitlin Galloway. I'm the product manager for Dispatch. So I work with the developers and all of the other teams at ForeFlight to bring you new features in Dispatch. I was previously on the support team, and I've been with ForeFlight since 2015.
Hi, I'm Josh Pava, and I have worked for ForeFlight, working around Dispatch for about 3 years now. And my duties within Dispatch are primarily within test engineering as well as consulting on the product. And in addition to my duties at ForeFlight, I also am a full-time professional pilot. I manage 2 aircraft, Bombardier and Gulfstream. And I try to use the knowledge that I've gained from that experience to apply into some of our product and product ideas into ForeFlight Dispatch.
Thanks, guys. On the agenda for today, we'll start with an overview of ForeFlight Dispatch, what it does, and how it fits into the ForeFlight product ecosystem. We'll also look at how it works seamlessly with ForeFlight Mobile and how third-party integrations make planning simpler than ever. Caitlin will then take us to the flights list, which is the main view of ForeFlight Dispatch and allows for collaboration across your organization. She'll then demonstrate its capabilities using 2 example flights planned using Dispatch. The first will be a transatlantic flight from New York to Paris, and following that, she'll plan an EMEA flight from Paris to Doha. After that, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Before I hand it over to Caitlin and Josh, I want to bring in my colleague Sam to explain how Dispatch fits into the ForeFlight ecosystem and the seamless workflow that it provides.
What is ForeFlight Dispatch? Well, to put it in a sentence, Dispatch is a powerful component of ForeFlight Web that delivers next-generation, multi-user, schedule-to-mobile flight planning, resulting in greater efficiency and productivity for flight departments of any size. So let's break down all of what's in that sentence because there's quite a lot there. First of all, we have the team flight planning aspect. One of the great things about Dispatch is it enables really highly collaborative flight planning. So all of your flight planners, your dispatchers, your schedulers, and even your pilots can all collaborate on the same platform and can view a summary of all active flights planned and filed and completed all in one place. This is the flights view, and this is the first thing that Caitlin will cover when she gets to her portion of the webinar. We also, like I mentioned schedulers there. We do support integrations with scheduling systems. Many of the most popular scheduling systems are supported. You'll see a list of them here in just a couple minutes. But what that allows you to do is every time you schedule a new flight, that flight is automatically imported to Dispatch and becomes available with all of its basic details so that flight planners can start working on that right away. Next up, we also have a very powerful trip support integration, currently with Jeppesen ITPS, Honeywell Forge, and UAS International Trip Support. What this does is to allow authorized trip support personnel to actually access your Dispatch instance just as if they were part of your account. So in addition to the scheduling integration, this is another really fantastic way to get support from third-party vendors when using Dispatch. And next up here, we have the integration with ForeFlight, which is, of course, one of the most essential parts of this, of Dispatch, and really the biggest thing that gives it so much power in terms of uniting your flight department and helping everyone collaborate better together. What this means is that when a flight planner is finished planning a flight, filing it, however far they want to go with it, they can then release that flight to assigned crew members. And those crew members will get an email like you can see on the left there. And that flight will then appear in their ForeFlight app so that they can brief the flight, they can review any attached documents, again, which may have been automatically generated like the briefing and the Navlog, or they may have been manually attached by flight planners or trip support personnel. Any documents like that will be available, so pilots can then review the flight, brief it, and get going with it. It's also possible to control whether or not pilots will be able to edit the flight. This is something that Caitlin will demonstrate during her walkthrough, in which the flight planner can choose to lock the flight from editing by the pilot or to make it editable so that those edits will then be transferred back and forth between the iPad and Dispatch. And lastly, the central component of dispatch that doesn't relate to any of its outside integrations is just the advanced flight planning that it supports. It really goes above and beyond what ForeFlight on its own can do as in terms of the mobile app, and it adds in a lot of really advanced capabilities like ETP and ETOPS, very complex route constraints, and just many other capabilities to support a wide range of different types of flight planning needs. And lastly, here's a nice little illustration of the whole ecosystem as I've been talking about it here. We have dispatch in the middle with your scheduling system on the left feeding in flight plans to dispatch, your trip support provider below there supporting your flight planners in whatever ways they need that, and then ForeFlight Mobile on the right so that those flight planners can then release the flights to the pilots in ForeFlight Mobile with all of the extensive capabilities that it provides to pilots. And in addition to these are some of the other major components of dispatch to mention. These sort of fit into the advanced flight planning component of it. You have Runway Analysis. This is something that is available both in dispatch and on ForeFlight Mobile. You have Weight and Balance. This is something in which you can now integrate your weight and balance planning into your flight planning. You have EAPIS. That's one of the advanced flight planning capabilities that dispatch supports. And lastly, there's the tankering capability that will bring a whole new level of cost savings to your tankering by automatically analyzing the flights in the system and determining the amount that needs to be tankered at each airport. And here, like I promised, on the left, you can see a list of the supported scheduling systems. This isn't actually all of them. And so if you want to see the entire list, you can go to foreflight.com/dispatch-scheduling. And there you can find all of the supported scheduling providers. And as well, like I mentioned before, in terms of the trip support providers, we have Jeppesen ITPS, Honeywell Forge, and UAS.
Thanks, Sam. With that, I'll hand it over to Caitlin and Josh for today's demonstration.
When you sign in to foreflight.com and you have dispatch activated, you'll see the dispatch tab at the top of your navigation bar. This is the view that you'll see once you've started planning some flights in here. Right now, we're just looking at a full list of flights, everything that's been planned either by the planners, the pilots, scheduling, and we can filter this in several different ways. So starting at the left here, we can sort by the filing status of the flight. We can also take a look at different time frames. We can set a custom time frame as well. We can take a look at who created this flight, whether it came in from the scheduling system or the pilot made it on their iPad. Over on the right here, we've got watch list and search. Watch list is really handy for a planner who wants to just look at the flights that they need to pay attention to. For example, let's say I just want to see the flights that are planned with the Gulfstream 550. So I can type in that code, or I can type in a tail number, kind of anything I can search with. And now I've narrowed this down to just that aircraft type. If I want to get even more specific, I can use search in conjunction with that, and I can search for Rachel. And now it's narrowed this down to just 4 flights with that aircraft type and that pilot in command. Once we've got it down to exactly what we want to work on, we can see on the right, we can click Edit, and that'll take you into the detailed planning view. And then if we click the More drop down, we've got some quick access without having to go into the flight. So we can file the flight plan, delete it, grab relevant documents, and we can also add tags. So if we click Add Tags, you have the ability now to set a trip ID and other tags. So you can set this up and customize it any way that you like. Let's say for this flight, our trip ID will be ForeFlight 456. And anything that you've used in the past is going to automatically come up as a suggestion, as you saw. We can also add a tag. Maybe this is a ferry flight. And once we hit update, now you can see there's our trip ID and any additional tags. Instead of working on an existing flight here, we're going to start from scratch so that we can walk through all of the features of dispatch. So I'm going to click New Flight at the top left. All right, so the place that I'm going to start here is the general section, and my default aircraft is automatically filled in for me. It's a Challenger 650, but any other aircraft that I have activated for dispatch are going to show in this drop-down list. Another thing that you'll see just at a glance here is if runway analysis and weight and balance are configured for that aircraft. So that way you can kind of see everything set up and ready to go. All right, so for our first leg today, we are going to go from Teterboro to Paris. Once we've set those airport fields, we can click on the Info button and we can see the METAR, the TAF, relevant NOTAMs, and we can also click on this button down here to go to the airport page and get even more information. Moving over to date and time, I'm going to plan for the following day. I'm going to set our departure for the morning. And I'm planning a time of departure, but you can also plan a time of arrival, and you can plan in Zulu time or local time, whatever you prefer. I've got a call sign connected to this tail number, so it automatically filled in for me, but of course we can change that if we need to. I'll just go ahead and leave this call sign for now. Moving down to the next row, we can select our alternate. Let's choose Orly. And if we need to, we can add a second alternate and a takeoff alternate as well. Just to the right of that, we've got alternate routing, which is especially important when we're flying into Europe. We'll have it set at direct here, but you can choose auto, or you can manually put in the exact routing that you want. Another item that you can choose here is your alternate cruise profile. So let's say we're going to fly at Mach 8.2. Before we go into the fuel section, I'm going to go ahead and just save my work. So I'll click Save at the bottom right, just so I don't lose my work that I've done so far. Moving into the fuel section, the first option we have here is to choose our climb, cruise, and descent profiles. So we've got the drop-down that's coming directly from the aircraft profile. This is the manufacturer published data. But if we're not exactly sure what would be the best choice, we can click into the Cruise Advisor. Cruise Advisor will let you compare 3 cruise profiles at a time. And what we're going to show you here is your best time and your best fuel. So depending on your mission, you can make an informed decision about what might be the best altitude and the best cruise profile for this flight. I'm going to go ahead and choose long range cruise since we are trying to save money on fuel today. We can also adjust our taxi fuel here. I'll go ahead and leave it as the default for now. And then we can choose a fuel policy. If we click the drop down, we have a few options here. These are the same options that you'll see in ForeFlight Mobile. Of course, you can change these as needed, but I usually just start with planning minimum fuel required. That's going to include your reserves, your alternate, all of those pieces. One thing that we are not going to get into in too much detail today, but I want to mention is Fuel Advisor. So you may have seen this button. It may or may not be activated for you. We did a specific webinar focused on Fuel Advisor. It is a really powerful tool that will give you the ability to do precise fuel planning, figure out your best uplift, cost savings at each airport along a trip. So I would definitely encourage you, if you want to learn more about that, you can take a look at foreflight.com/fuel advisor. The last thing in this section here is to choose an FBO. So depending on where we're going, we can, of course, choose the FBO that makes the most sense for us. Let's just go ahead and choose this one. And then we get into the advanced fuel options. The first thing we can choose here is our reserve policy. So we have the manual reserve policy, and this is something you can set in the aircraft profile. So you can set it for that aircraft, and then it's going to automatically carry that in here. You can choose to plan in minutes, in pounds. You can choose the part that you're operating under. Let's say for this flight, we're going to choose EASA Commercial. If we need to as well, we can choose a contingency policy. Let's say we'll do the default is 5%. That's just included in this reserve policy. One other item we can look at here is our wind model. So since we're planning for tomorrow, we're going to use forecast winds, but we also have the ability to use historical winds or fixed winds for scenario planning. Moving down to the crew section, here everyone on your account will be in here by default. So I'll go ahead and set myself as PIC, and I will set Josh as my SIC. Now he's not in my account, but let's say he's a contract pilot. I can just type in his email address, and now he's going to get the same flight plan information that I am. If we need to, we can also add additional crew if you have another SIC or a cabin attendant on board. Once I've set my crew, we can move over to the load section. This is a simple load. You can see our 2 pilots are already being counted here. We could do just a simple loading here if we want to, but usually what we would recommend and what most folks are going to need is to go to this weight and balance tab. So in here, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we've already got a weight and balance profile configured for this aircraft. You can see we've got our 10 passenger configuration. You can set up multiple weight and balance configurations for your aircraft, and you can do that on the aircraft tab. So here's our crew. We can, let's say we're going to just add a couple of folks here. And as we're doing that, we can see that our envelope is changing here on the right. Let's add just a little bit of cargo here. And once we've done that, we can generate our load manifest. So this is something that will also get sent to your crew, so they can open this up. They can take a look at the details, and they can also sign this and send it back. So, Josh, do you want to say anything about this report or weight and balance?
Yeah, sure, Caitlin. So this report I find to be really useful as a pilot because it contains a few areas that are of interest and maybe are required to be noted on the paperwork. Some of those areas are your forward and aft limits for the weight and balance. As you can see on the left-hand side where the weights are listed, not only do we tell the pilot what the CG location is, but we also show what the forward and aft limit for that weight is. So that's really useful for data and document retention purposes, because at least now it's always part of the flight. We can always refer back to it, and we have that mandated data that we're required to keep. Something else that is found here, it's also elsewhere, but on sort of a, at a glance, we get to see what items are included in the basic operating weight. So we have the BOW tags here. So for tow bars, maybe cabin stock, lab supplies, that sort of thing, lab charge. So I use this report as a great, kind of overall view of the flight. Where's my CG? Where's where is the weight distributed? How much weight do I have on board? What's being included in that weight calculation? So it's a great way to get an overall review of what exactly where the weights are and that sort of thing.
Thanks, Josh. So now that we've got our at least our preliminary weight and balance started, we're going to go back to the flight tab. I just want to point out as well, when you see the crew and load section here, now you can see assigned and weight and balance. So this is grayed out. If you need to make changes after this, you'll need to go to that weight and balance tab to make those changes. Let's open up this contingency planning section. So if you need to enter ETP airports, if you need to plan for ETOPS, you can do that in this section. So what we're going to do is put in our ETP airport pairs. So I've got a few here that I just use all the time. So we'll use Gander, we'll go to Keflavik, and then let's go Keflavik to Shannon. Once we've put in our ETP airport pairs, we can check the box for PSR, our point of safe return, and we can also check the box for ETOPS. And what we'll see on the map here is that our circles are showing up as well. So if we open up the map just a little bit more here, we've got our point of safe return. We've also got all of our different scenarios here, one engine in op, medical, depressurization, and then we've got our ETOPS rings. We've got 2 that we've configured for this aircraft. I'm going to go ahead and tuck this away, but we'll leave it all on. Moving down to the routes section, we can adjust our initial altitude if we need to. We are planning in IFR flight rules, and we can see in recommended routes, we've got one right here, and it is Eurocontrol valid. So we can use this, if nothing else, as a starting point. Our recommended route is going to consider wind, temperature, aircraft performance. In the US, it's going to consider what's most likely to be cleared as filed. And we're just going to try to find you, kind of globally, we're going to try to find you a time and fuel optimized routing. Depending on your airport pairs, you might have a ton of route suggestions. You might only have one, but we will always generate at least one for you. Let's say this looks good for this flight. We've already got it here in the selected route, and maybe we know we want to fly this all the time, or we know this one gets cleared a lot. We can click on this save icon and we can save this. We can rename it if we want to, or we can just leave it. When I hit save route, once we scroll down, now we've got a new section called saved routes. So if you have any routes that you fly all the time, you can save those in your company database. All right, so moving back up the page, we've already talked about the weight and balance tab, but let's take a look at the runway analysis tab. In the runway analysis tab here, we've got all of the airports that we've input for this flight plan. So we can open up each section and take a look at the details. Let's start with our takeoff airport. And when we open up Teterboro, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. We first see the weather section. So depending on what weather information is available, we are going to fill this in with a current METAR or a TAF, but you can also input your own current weather information. Just below that, you can adjust the configuration of your aircraft. You can set defaults in the aircraft profile so that you don't have to manage this every time, but of course if something changes, surface condition, for example, you can make those changes here. As we move into the runway section here, we do have this toggle to auto-select the best runway and engine out procedure for your best max takeoff weight. You can definitely choose a different runway if you want to, but it's a great starting point and it's going to give you a suggestion for what's best. So you can take a look at the details here. We're suggesting runway 1. You can see your max takeoff weight limit, that is a structural limit, surface information, and then also engine out procedures. For most airports, we're going to offer a straight out and an RNAV procedure. And Josh, do you want to talk about these a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. So, yeah, as you mentioned, every runway that we have train data for is going to have a straight out procedure. And for some more difficult runways, or perhaps runways that are more commonly used, we're going to have an engine out procedure that is RNAV based as well. And so the EOPs, the engine out procedures that are RNAV based, when we're designing those procedures, we're trying to model them to be very similar to the departure procedure that you're most likely to be cleared using. So at the very least, we'll try to keep a few waypoints, the starting waypoints of the published departure procedure into our EOP. And as we see on the screen here, when you click the details button, you're going to get a text description of what the EOP is. So in this case, we're declaring that it's an RNAV procedure. You have to use GPS and to use flyby fixes unless we tell you that there's something different, and that you're to use a 15-degree bank. And then we go into the text description as you would expect, which is runway heading till a certain fix, and then on a track to another fix. And then lastly, once you get to that fix, climb in the holding pattern, which way to turn. In this case, it's a left turn, a 25-degree bank, how long the legs are, so 5 miles, and the inbound course, along with any airspeed limitations that may apply, 230 indicated, as you can see here. And then we can go on to the map view, which is basically a graphical view of the departure. So I can tell, looking at this really simply, I'm going to more or less go straight out, and I'm entering a holding pattern from there. So between the text and the graphical description, it's really nice to be able to get a mental picture, as well as be able to compare with the chart of what you're cleared to see how those may be similar or may differ.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so once we've gone through and selected all of our runways and made sure everything looks good at all of our airports, we can generate our report. And Josh, do you want to say a little bit about this as well?
Yeah, for sure, Caitlin. So this report is extremely useful because at a glance, it gives the flight crew an option, or the opportunity, I should say, to view takeoff and landing performance and all the assumptions that go with it. And by assumptions, I'm saying landing weight, takeoff weight, the winds at takeoff and destination, temperatures, any sort of aircraft configuration. So maybe it's flaps, maybe it's anti-ice, that sort of thing. And then, of course, it also lists, not only our departure weight, but what our V speeds are for that weight, and takeoff distance, the level off altitude in the case of a takeoff, and also the takeoff trim setting. And so the takeoff trim setting is based on the weight and balance that you previously computed. So it's taking the CG at the weight of this takeoff, and it's saying your takeoff trim will be, in this case, 4.6. So we would set the stab trim for 4.6, and then we know we're set for our departure. And on the landing summary, just off to the right side, that's very similar. Same general concept where it lists all of your criteria for landing, aircraft configuration, and that sort of thing. And just below the takeoff and landing summaries, we then display the engine out procedure that the takeoff numbers are based off of. So again, we're showing it in text format, explaining how to fly the engine out procedure. And then we continue down the page, and we get a chart that lists for our given takeoff weight at various temperatures what the maximum is for each runway, given a RNAV departure and the straight out departure. So at a glance, if the temperature has changed, say 2 or 3 degrees, we're able to say, hey, now the temperature is 30 degrees. In this case, I'm still departing runway 01, but how has this affected my maximum allowable takeoff weight? And in this case, we can see it hasn't. We're still allowed 48,200. It's a structural limitation, and we can depart using EOP 1 just fine off of that with no issues, no performance changes. And we scroll down and we reach the landing section, which is very similar to the takeoff. But again, it allows us to see at a glance if something changes at our arrival or our destination, how does that affect my performance? So what we give you is the at the landing weight that's the maximum allowable. We'll give you the actual distance, factor distance with the planned winds, no winds, and a 10 knot tailwind. So, a forecast scenario, a good planning scenario of 0 winds, and a worst case scenario of 10 knots. Because, of course, beyond 10 knots, most of us can't land with a 10 knot tailwind, beyond 10 knots. So we're given all 3 scenarios, and we get a glance, we get an image, I should say. We paint an image of which scenario is the most limiting for us on which runway. I think that pretty well describes our summary report for Runway Analysis. So back to you, Caitlin.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I'll go ahead and close that for now. Moving over to the ATC Data tab. If you need to, this is where you can change any details before you file the flight plan. So, lots of different options and configurations here. We're going to keep it pretty standard for today, but just know that there's a lot of options in here. We're going to keep it general aviation, filing IFR. We can add any remarks if we need to. And some other items we can add here are flight watchers. So let's say you have a planner or someone else who is not part of the crew for this flight, but they want to get all the updates about it. So we can click Add Watcher, and we're going to see our drop-down account list here. Let's say we want Henrik to watch, and you can also just manually input an email address too. Another thing we can add here is dispatcher notes. So these are going to show to the crew on their Navlog, and you can always add more notes later. We've got a ton of space in here, so let's just say we're going to put in a note that we want to make sure that the crew sees. And this is just a note about passenger transportation once we get to our destination. Scrolling down, if we need to make any changes to Afton addressing, we're going to automatically put in the Afton addresses that you need, but if you need some additional ones, you can put those in. And then we'll see the exact flight plan as it's being sent to ATC. Once we do file this flight plan, and I'm not actually going to do it here in the webinar, but once we did file this flight plan, we would start getting filing messages back as well. So we'd start to see when action is happening on the flight plan. Moving over to the Files tab. If I've got any company documents or flight-specific documents that I want to make sure the crew can access, I can put them here. I'm going to go ahead and add just a couple of documents I have on my computer. And there's a lot of different file types that are supported. And you can see as well, we've got this toggle to include this in the release email. So there's multiple ways for them to access these documents. Over on the right side of the page, we've got our performance table. And as we've made changes throughout the flight, these numbers have recalculated. We've also got flight advisories. So it doesn't look like we have any for this flight, but if we had any runway closures, TFRs, any major items like that are going to show up here as well. Up at the top, we've got Navlog and Briefing. On the Navlog, we have this drop-down. So we have the ability to set up custom Navlogs in the dispatch settings. So this is something that only administrators would have access to do. We've already got some templates in here as well. So you can choose a specific Navlog for a specific flight. We'll just go with the default for now, and we'll click on the briefing button because the Navlog is going to be included in it. All right, so this is just our default Navlog that's going to show on top of the briefing. So we're going to have a briefing packet here that we can do some customization with. So we've got the general flight information that we just planned. We've got our dispatcher notes here that we put in on the ATC Data tab. And as we scroll down, we've got some space to make notes. put in our departure ATIS, write down our clearance, and then we've got all of our waypoints for this flight. And we've also got space on the right here to record your actuals. We've got our alternate information. And since we're flying with ETP airports, we've got an ETP summary here. So we're going to have a little bit longer than usual Navlog. So we've got the summary, just a quick look at the numbers here. And then as we scroll down past the airport diagram, we've got a full ETP report. So this ETP report is going to give you all of the details for each of your scenarios. So you've got all of those numbers right here in the Navlog ready to go if you encounter any of these scenarios. Once we get past the ETP report, we have the option to include your ICAO flight plan form, and then we get into the briefing. So the first thing we're going to see here is the vertical cross-section chart. And this is going to show you icing, turbulence, terrain, winds, and temps. And you can see our flight path as well. Scrolling down, we've got a top-down view of winds, temps, and turbulence. And you do have the option to have multiple wind charts at different altitudes. So you can see we've got 370, 410. 450. So you've got a full picture here. This is, again, specific to the ETP part of our flight plan, but we've got an ETP wind chart in here as well. And then we'll have our significant weather chart. And this is an additional document that we can generate for you. This is the overflight report. So what we'll do here is show you entry and exit points of the airspaces that you're overflying and give you an estimate of the overflight charges associated with that. METARs and TAFs with some color information, SIGMETs, AirMets, and we also support rain prediction as well. So tons of details in this briefing. Over here on more, just a way to grab some of those other documents that we already looked at in the briefing, but if you need to get a one-on-one, you can do that. And let's hit save one more time. Let's say we're ready to send this over to the crew. We're going to hit release, and I'll go ahead and release this flight. And once we're done with our other flight plan, we'll take a look on the iPad. So once this is actually done releasing, we will see a timestamp here. All right, so let's go ahead and plan our next leg. And what I'm going to do is at the top center here, I'm going to click on Next Flight. When I click Next Flight, the system will set my previous destination airport to my departure airport. So you can see we've got Paris here in departure. For this trip, we're going to go to Doha. And if you don't know the airport identifier, you can type in the airport name or the city name and we'll help you find it. You also have the option to set a custom airport where you can set your own coordinates and your own name for that airport. With that next flight, it's going to go ahead and set my departure time and date into the future a little bit as well. Let's maybe say we're going to take a couple hours in between there. And we can choose an alternate as well. And moving down to the fuel section, we can take a look at the cruise advisor quickly and see what makes the most sense for us. Let's say we want to save fuel again. We'll go ahead and leave it where it's suggested. We'll plan with min fuel. We can choose an FBO. Since we're flying out of Paris, we'll go ahead and leave our reserve policy as EASA commercial. We'll leave our contingency policy the same. And since I did that next flight, we've got the same crew and the same passengers on board, so that's all staying the same. Going to contingency planning, we don't need to set the ETP airport pairs on this one, so we'll just skip over it. And we'll go down to the routes section. So we've got our recommended route. We can see that it's Eurocontrol valid. But we definitely might deal with some complexities in this region. So I think this is a good starting point, but we'll probably want to go into the route builder. So the route builder is a really powerful part of dispatch, especially when you're flying complex routing. The first section here is route constraints. So we have a lot of different constraints in here. The one I'm going to use for this flight is avoid country. And we can choose Syria here. And now that's been added as a constraint. We can add as many constraints as we want. I'm just going to do this one and click Generate New Route. You can see over here on the right that this space is highlighted, so you can see exactly what we're avoiding. So there are a ton of constraint options. Just to give you a quick look at the list here, we've got via or avoid a lot of different things. We've got waypoints, FIRS, if you want to go via a track or a certain departure or arrival. We've also got partial routing if you've got overflight permits, controlled airspace, restricted airspace, even custom shapes. So you could draw your own shape on the map and we can route around that. So now we've got our new route. We can see it's Eurocontrol valid, so we're good to go there. And if we scroll down, we can also see every waypoint on our list. If we need to make more changes per leg, we can do that here as well. So let's say if we click the plus here, we have some options. We can change the altitude. So if you need to descend early, you can make those changes here. If you need to change your cruise profile, add a delay, or add a point, you can make all of those changes here. There are some additional route tools. And if we click the drop down here, the first thing I want to show you is the route report. So this is going to take a look at the Jeppesen Airway Manual. And it's going to take a look at any airways that you may be overflying in your route of flight. And we're going to let you know if there's any restrictions related to those. So you can see we've got two results here. And if we did, for our flight, if we needed to avoid one of these, we can just go ahead and check that box and avoid those segments. So if you need to take a look at those airways there, that route report is really great for that. Saves a lot of time. Another tool that I want to talk about is airspace crossings. And we'll get this loaded up. And Josh, do you want to tell us about this?
Yeah, sure. So airspace crossings is a really useful tool, both as a dispatcher as well as a pilot, because what it allows us to do at a glance is see what FIRS and what countries we're going to be overflying with the selected route. And along with that, we get how long we're going to be in the airspace, the time that we're going to enter or exit their airspace, and where exactly we're entering and exiting. As we can see here on the screen, all that information is listed right here. We have the waypoint names, the lat longs as well if there isn't a named exit or entry point. If we switch over to the country view here, then we are able to see exactly which country it is that we're going to be transitioning to and from. So it's presented in a similar way, but rather than explaining it in as far as FIRS are concerned, it's going to be used in the country. Pretty useful tool, especially for overflight planning, but it's also one last check, sort of as a reality check to make sure that the countries and FIRS that we're overflying are in fact okay to overfly, per company policy or perhaps ATC restrictions.
Thanks, Josh. Another thing that you can do here is export this information if that's something you need to do. Let's go back, and we'll go back one more time to our main flight planning view. And since we've got the same crew, same folks on from last time, we could just take a quick look at our weight and balance, make sure everything still looks good there. Take a look at our runway options here, see what our suggestions are. Make sure all of our filing information is correct. Let's say, let's just put in a dispatcher note here. Add any files if we need to. And we can generate that Navlog, that briefing, any additional documents that we need to get. So I'm going to hit save one more time at the bottom right. And I know we talked about tags at the beginning on the flights list. Let's go ahead and put a tag on this one just so you guys can see what this looks like. Let's call this ForeFlight 9012, and we will do hit update, we'll hit save, and then we'll go ahead and release this to the crew. Now, you've got some options here, and you can set this to whatever default that you prefer for your account. But depending on how you want the crew to interact with their flight plans, you can release as read-only, or you can release as editable. So depending on if you're, a self-dispatching pilot crew who's going to be filing this on the iPads, you probably want to release as editable. But you do have just another option here. I'll go ahead and release the flight. And again, we're going to see our timestamp here once it's released. And one last thing I want to mention here is this change history. So if we open this up, there's not a ton of detail on this one, but this is giving you an audit log. So if we open it up, we can see every single change that I have made to this flight. And if I came in, an hour from now and made another change, all of that's going to be recorded here so we can see who has touched the flight, what changes were made. So you've got a great historical log here. All right, so now that we have done all of our planning here, I'm going to switch over to the iPad and we'll take a look at that. All right, so now I'm on ForeFlight Mobile, and if I navigate to the Flights tab, since I set myself as pilot in command, I've already got these flight plans on my device. So I can tap in here and take a look at everything that we've planned. And at the top here, I've got Navlog briefing, just like we saw in dispatch, and I've also got 2 new files. So I can open these up, I can take a look. If your dispatcher or if your ops team adds any new documents, you'll get notified here with another little red bubble. We can also tap on our takeoff and landing buttons here so we can see all of the details for the runway that we have planned. We can also grab that summary. And we've got all the details in that runway summary right here on the iPad. Let's take a look at our other flight plan as well. And when we are ready to go, ready to fly, we can hit this Send To button and send this to the map. And there's our route. We're ready to go. All right, so one more thing I want to show you on the computer. We're not going to get into all of the dispatch settings today, but I definitely wanted to talk about operational rules. So just going back to the flight plan where we just were, if you're an administrator on your account, you'll see the settings option at the top right. So we're going to hop over to operational rules. Now, something you'll notice is everything that I did today, I did manually. I set my alternate, I put in, a call sign, I set everything by hand. But of course, you're going to be busy. There's some things that are always going to be the same. And so operational rules gives you the ability to set a bunch of default rules so that you don't have to spend time setting the crew, setting the alternate airport, anything like that. So I just want to take a look at that really quickly. I've already got a couple of examples in here. So once you've got some operational rules created, you can see the rule type, the name of it, which you can set yourself, and then the condition. So if departure is this airport and destination is this airport, then add the alternate to be this with manual routing at this altitude. Some of the other rule types that we actually saw in our flight plans today, this call sign option for the tail number that I was planning with, it automatically input that call sign for me, and it automatically set my taxi fuel for Teterboro as our departure to 300 pounds. So these are just a few that were already in there, but there's a lot of automation that can be done. So if we add a rule, you can see there's a big list here of just a ton of different options. If let's say maybe you just have one custom Navlog and you want everyone to always have it, you don't have to add a condition. You can just set always. Always set the Navlog to international. Add the rule. And then you'll see, once we look at our list here, we have a new rule for a custom Navlog. Always set our custom Navlog to international. So you don't always have to say only for this tail or only for this thing. You can really customize exactly the way that you want to set up your account so that a lot of the extra work by your planners is removed.
Thanks, Caitlin. Before we get into Q&A, I want to mention another webinar that we have coming up. Sam and Caitlin both mentioned ForeFlight's integrations with flight service providers. And coming up on March 1st, we're going to hold a webinar focused on how Jeppesen International Trip Planning Service, or ITPS, can simplify every aspect of your flight planning. They can even use your dispatch account to plan flights, coordinate your ground handling, secure overflight permits, and dozens of other services. And the best part is you can pick and choose any of those that fit your needs. We're almost ready to take your questions, but first I want to get into a few links related to dispatch so you can learn more about what you've seen today. First, you can learn more about dispatch at foreflight.com/dispatch. Second, you can sign up to get started at foreflight.com/dispatch-form. This will get you in touch with our sales team and give them some useful information to get the conversation started. Next, you can register for more webinars, including the one that I just mentioned, and watch past ones at foreflight.com/webinars. And lastly, if you have any questions about dispatch and what it can do for your organization, you can reach out to us at sales@foreflight.com. With that, let's move on to some questions. We've gotten a lot of great questions today coming in, so thank you all so much for those. First question I have is for you, Caitlin. Will you be adding alternate airports to the runway report?
Thanks, Jay. We actually just had a dispatch release today, early this morning. So yes, we just added that to the runway report. So in the past, the runway report just had takeoff and landing, but now you've got alternates.
Wonderful. Thanks, Caitlin. Josh, the second question's for you. Do you support ballast fuel in dispatch?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, so similar to Caitlin's answer, in the dispatch release that we did today, we now do support ballast fuel. So if your aircraft it requires ballast fuel and is set up for ballast fuel within ForeFlight, you will now see that in the wind balance tab of ForeFlight Dispatch as both a message telling you that it requires X amount of ballast fuel, as well as a section where the user can specify how much ballast fuel they want to carry.
Thanks, Josh. Caitlin, the next question's for you. Would you be able to show us where the aircraft weight and balance information's entered? One example given was the galley cabinets.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been spending most of our time here in the dispatch tab, but what I'm going to do, we kind of assumed that we had already set up all of our aircraft information when we started this flight planning journey. So if I hadn't set up my aircraft yet, I'm going to go over here to the aircraft tab. If you are on a business account, only administrators are going to be able to modify the organization aircraft. So I'm going to search for my 650, just because I know this one is already configured. And I'm just going to scroll down to the weights section. And you can see that I already have some configurations set up. I can always add another one, and you can see I already have these 2 templates. So there's a lot of aircraft that we've already modeled templates for, so you can kind of just go ahead and get started with that and then modify. But if we don't support your aircraft or you just want to do it on your own, you can set a blank template. So since these are already configured, I'm just going to go into one of these. So I'll click Edit. And here is where all of this information is set up. So where I can put in my basic empty weight, if I need to use percent MAC, if I need to add additional stations. A lot of these I think just came right out of the template. And then if there's something like the flight deck that I want to include in basic operating weight, I can just come in here, set custom weights, weight limits as well, and then check that box if I want to include it in my basic operating weight. You can also add a note if there's just some little note you need to make about that station. So there's another example there, galley supplies included in the basic operating weight. And then just to show you kind of at the bottom here, we've got our forward and aft CG limits, and then we've got the envelope preview.
Wonderful. Thanks, Caitlin. And if you'd like a more in-depth walkthrough on that, we have a previous webinar that we've done. You can find that at foreflight.com/webinars. You can also find videos in our video library. Those could be helpful for you as well. Josh, the next question I have is for you. It'd be great if we could change the default to rolling takeoff, as that is the most common and most conservative. Having the default set to static can lead to an error. Is that something you plan to change?
So it's a really great question, and it has an answer that, at least in the beginning part, is similar to what Caitlin was saying, where if you are an admin for the aircraft, then this is something that can be changed, assuming the aircraft is licensed for dispatch. So there's a lot of conditions there, and the reason why I put all those conditions is if you're using ForeFlight Mobile outside of dispatch, this is very easily changed by going into the app and going to the More tab, then into aircraft, then open up the aircraft that you're specifically talking about, going to field performance and modifying those values. However, if you're using the aircraft in ForeFlight dispatch, then the aircraft is published and is owned by an admin, which basically means that you're going to have to make this change on ForeFlight web rather than within the app. Because the app is going to show the airplane as read-only. So if this is a change that you want to make, you should either, if you're an admin or your chief pilot or scheduler is an admin, talk to them about going into ForeFlight web, opening the aircraft, and modifying the field performance defaults from there. And certainly rolling takeoff, if your aircraft supports that, will be one of the options you can select to on or off.
Thanks, Josh. The next question's for you as well. Can you talk about the criteria for EOPs and also about where the obstacle data comes from?
Sure. So the EOPs are designed with AC 120-91 and ICAO guidance in mind. There was a question about whether we use TERPs, and we don't use TERPs because TERPs really only apply to normal non-emergency procedures, such as the design of approaches, departures, stars, those sorts of things. So our EOPs are designed in-house with the advisory circular and ICAO guidance in mind. And the obstacle data is sourced from various providers the primary source being Jeppesen. So the terrain and obstacle data all come from Jeppesen primarily, with some additional sources that were used to supplement that.
Great, thanks, Josh. Caitlin, the next question's for you. If a custom route is saved, will this route be accessible for the same city pair under a different tail number or flight plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you save a route, it's based on the airport pairs that you put in. It has nothing to do with the time or date or the aircraft that you're planning with. So anytime you put those two airport pairs in, those saved routes are going to show up.
Wonderful. Next question, also for you, Caitlin. I can set custom weights for a certain tail number or aircraft type, but not related to a user. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a couple different places that we can set custom weights. One of them being we can set some defaults in the weight and balance profile. We're back in the dispatch tab, and if you're an administrator, you have the settings tab. So just on the main planning settings, if we scroll down, we have crew and passenger average weights. So there's average weights that you can set here. And then if you want to set some specific rules, we can go to the operational rules tab, click add a rule, custom occupant weight. So let's see, if we add a condition, let's say if tail number is let's say our Challenger 650, then set custom occupant weight to. So you can see pilot, cabin attendant, infants, children, adults, males, females. So you can set those. So you can't set it specifically to one person, like to John Doe, but there is some customization that you can do in the settings.
Thanks. One last question that we have. For FBO info in the fuel prices, can we load pricing info from our contract fuel providers so the preferred pricing shows, or perhaps company-specific pricing as in signature pricing for our company?
Yeah, so we support a lot of this through JetFuelX. So if you go to the JetFuelX tab on the left sidebar, just a little further down from where we've been, you can add any fuel cards that you have. You can add as many as you want. And what that does is that starts the conversation with the fuel vendor in ForeFlight. And a lot of our fuel vendors will just automatically upload a price sheet for you. And what you'll see is you'll still see retail pricing, but you'll also see JFX. And that will be your best price of all of your cards at that FBO. If you do have a discount on top of that, I don't think we can show those. Maybe that's something that you could import. But yeah, it's definitely possible. And we also have a JetFuelX video, so you can check that out on foreflight.com/videos.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Josh. Just to go over these links one last time on this page, you can learn more about Dispatch at foreflight.com/dispatch. You can sign up to get started at foreflight.com/dispatch-form. You can register for more webinars and watch past ones and contact sales as well. And don't feel like you have to rush in writing down these links. We'll also be emailing you every link that was mentioned during today's webinar as well. So with that, thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you on the next webinar.